always.
Sorry, go ahead.
That, we always, what can I do? What am I going to do? Who am I going to impact? Or, what projects do I have to finish? Just the busyness of life. And it helped me release that and just say, okay, how am I going to find joy in my children or with whoever I'm at the moment? And so I really liked this chapter, obviously.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I mean, it reminds me that he says that we are given both in life and in death. And that's,
Yeah.
And I think life maybe is self-evident, but yeah, it's this idea of being given in death that is really kind of intriguing.
Yeah.
Before we go there, and let's go there, but before we go there, let's dwell a little bit in the idea that we're given in life. And one of the things he talks about in this chapter, if I remember right, is the idea of talents versus gifts. We give ourselves talents versus gifts. What do you think about that? Because that's kind of, Jenny, I think kind of what you're getting at is that we those are typically the ways we think about giving is, well, I have these talents, so this is how I'm going to use my life, right? But he mentions the folks at Larch where he lives, the people who are mentally handicapped, and he said have very few talents, and yet they are so, how did he say that? Supremely gifted or something like that. Just
something like that. Yeah, he has a way of communicating that is absolutely wonderful. I can't find that in the chapter.
Splendid. They are splendidly gifted. Splendidly gifted.
Yes.
And he talks about one of them who has been, I believe, Bill, I think is his name. He's been hurt by family, and yet he has a great ability to for a relationship and loyal relationship. I think Bill traveled with Henri some as he went and talked about Larch, and probably did some fundraising for Larch from reading some of his other works. That Bill just had this sense of companionship and loyalty, and it wasn't until Henri stepped out of the business world and kind of stopped focusing so much on his own talents that he was able to recognize, that the gifts of those with now whom he lives. And I think for us, for me, I can speak. I guess I can speak for myself, but that's kind of how I was trained: is use your gifts, or use your talents, and get a good education, get a good job, work hard, all these things. And I don't think I was ever told, do this so that you measure up or so that you're loved. I mean, I think I had a pretty healthy upbringing with parents who worked hard to love unconditionally, but still that's the message of the world, right? Measure up, accomplish, all of this sort of thing.
There was a few years back when, way back when Julie Jolivet was working at Emmanuel. Do you remember that, Jenny?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I know Julie a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, she had as many people as were willing take the spiritual gifts test.
Right.
And I remember being in the large room, fellowship hall, and everybody standing in a circle, everybody who had taken that test, standing in a circle, facing each other. And then she would call out a gift, and whoever had that gift was supposed to step forward. Okay. This is a long time ago, and it kind of sticks in my mind. And so how we were identifying our spiritual gifts, and then encouraged to work in the area of our spiritual gifts. And the spiritual gifts were not necessarily talents. So it's agreeing with what he's saying, you have talents, but then you also have gifts. And it's important to work in the area of your giftedness, to your gifts. And I really related to this because you mentioned so many gifts here, the top of page 114.
Yeah.
That they're part of who we are. Friendship as a gift, and kindness and patience, joy, peace, forgiveness, gentleness, love, hope, trust, many others. I mean, we don't think of those, they're certainly not talents,
Right.
but they're our gifts, and they're the true gifts that we have to offer each other. So, so much of what Henri Nouwen writes, it seems like it's repetitious to me.
Yes.
But this thing kind of really stuck out and spoke to me. Yeah.
So the question, he says, isn't what can we offer each other, but who can we be for each other? That's on page 113.
Yeah.
Who can we be for each other? And that does bring with it a sense of freedom, I think, to be who God created us to be, to abide in that knowledge that we are the beloved, and it's not about meeting the mark or accomplishing. And again, meeting the mark isn't a bad. And he talks about that too. That he'll talk about that in the last chapter. Is that these things aren't bad. The strivings that we have, we're only a slave to the world, or the world is only evil if we become a slave to it. He talks about that in the last chapter. So these strivings aren't bad. Using our talent isn't bad, but it can push us to live outside of our belovedness and to kind of live on our own strength or our own power, our own willpower, and he's inviting us, I think, always to daily return to this idea that we are the beloved. And, we are enough. We
and the uniqueness of each person. We were talking about this book, Henri Nouwen. I was talking to somebody that I know is really a Bible scholar, and I said, are you interested in the Henri Nouwen series? No, I just can't get into it. It just doesn't speak to me. And I thought, well, that's interesting. It doesn't speak to everybody.
No, right.
We're not alike. We're not alike.
Right.
I was drawn to the fact on page 115 where he said the so visible brokenness of our handicapped people allowed them to offer their gifts freely and without inhibition. And I think that's where we get stuck sometimes in those gifts he talked about at page 114. Those aren't the things that the world judges us by. The success and how much money and what kind of home you live in, that kind of thing. So it's really not the mundaneness of the world, but it's the how do I want to say that?
Competitiveness.
Yeah. And the things he's listed here are what we should be. That should be what we strive for. And do we teach our kids that?
Yeah, I marked that too. It spoke to me. Yeah.
So let's move into the second part of this, that we are called to give ourselves not only in life but in death as well. So Jenny, where was that quote? Do you know where that quote was that you
I had to I remembered part of it, and
could you just read it again, because we didn't get it on the recording, but it's a very powerful quote.
And there's a part that was the quote from him, and then there's a follow-up, so I'll read that part of it too.
Okay, great.
We will all die one day. That is one of the few things we can be sure of. But will we die well? That is less certain. Dying well means dying for others, making our lives fruitful for those we leave behind. The big question, therefore, is not, what can I still do in the years I have left to live? But how can I prepare myself for my death so that my life can continue to bear fruit in the generations that will follow me? Jesus died well because through dying, he sent his spirit of love to his friends. who with that Holy Spirit could live better lives. Can we also send the spirit of love to our friends when we leave them? Or are we too worried about what we can still do? Dying can become our greatest gift if we prepare ourselves to die well. I
Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
was talking with Roz Hemberger today, and she just lost her mother not quite 2 months ago, and her father is dying now, and they've called in hospice. And I think what he said to her last night, he said, Roz, it's okay, I'm 93, it's okay. And I said to her that was quite a gift he gave her, to say he's okay knowing he's going to die, and that she shouldn't worry about it anymore, but just spend the time with him. And I thought that was really awesome for him to say that to her.
That is a gift. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I like Henry, I've seen people die well, and I've seen people die not so well. I just remember I was doing some chaplaincy when I was still in seminary, and I was called to a room, to the bedside of a man who was dying. And I really learned a lot on this visit, because I went into the room without asking questions first. I was just called, so I went. And I went into the room, and he's kind of flailing around, and I think he had 2 daughters and a wife, and they were just literally shouting at him, "Oh, please don't go, Daddy. You can't leave us. You can't,
Oh,
And finally, just as I walk into the room, I think he recognized I was there. He just ripped off his oxygen mask and he died. I mean, it was just the worst, almost a torment.
wow.
Ooh.
Because they wouldn't give him permission to go, and he had no peace in that moment. It was terrible, actually. So I tried to minister the best I could, and but I mean, it's that denial of death that didn't
Mhm.
allow them to get to a place before he died to find peace, and I think that's what Nouwen is really pushing us toward, is this idea of acceptance of our own mortality, but then also this idea of how do we do this well, because it has become a gateway to giving ourselves away, and that's really not very well acknowledged, and it is hard to understand. But yeah, you are right. Roz's dad did give her a gift there. Just, it's all right.
Yeah.
It's all right.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that says, that speaks volumes. He's saying, I have faith. I'm not afraid.
Yeah.
To say that also means that he trusts her to take care of her business, and trusts God to
Right.
take care of his daughter. And I mean, there's just so much in that little,
Yeah.
just those few words. It's okay.
It's okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. With the broken blood vessel in my eye, often that's one of the first signs that your leukemia has relapsed. And so, I was told to go to the lab in the Albert Lee clinic, and we went. And so we just had the conversation as we were driving up there. So if I'm relapsed, what do we need to do? Who do we need to talk to? What do we need to say to our kids? Because I obviously am an open person. I like talking about processes that I'm going through. And then we were thrilled that my blood work was all okay, and I have not relapsed. But every time we have a little scare like that, it leads us back to some questions that we have to talk to each other about. So I'm hoping that the day I do relapse and the day I do go, that all of that communication will have helped those that are left behind.
Mhm. Yeah.
So this book has just been a great opportunity to read through it, because I wasn't in this place 10 years ago.
Yeah. And maybe you shouldn't have been at that time, because, there is a time to fight and there is a time to surrender. There's,
Yeah.
but there's also, I
That's true.
think in between there, I think what Nouwen is saying, there's a time to prepare, and that's probably what you've been doing over the last 10
Yeah.
years at some level, at different levels throughout those 10 years, is preparing,
That's probably very true. Yeah.
and that's a gift to be able to have that time to do that.
Yes. Very much so.
I've seen people or families go through sudden deaths, and that's, there's some blessing to the person who goes suddenly, but it's so hard on families, isn't it? It's just
Right.
so hard.
Right.
Yeah. He uses the Elisha story, page 122. And that story is from 2 Kings. It's really 2 Kings 4:42 to 44. And he says, it's a story much like the feeding of the 5,000, only I think they have about 20 loaves for 100 men. And the person that has the loaves says, how can I give these few loaves? And you got to remember that these are not, the big loaves that we have today. They're probably just little dough loaves, basically. And how can I give these loaves to 100 men? And God, the Lord says, give them. And so they're given. And then they all ate and were fed, and there was some left over. And so it's really a story that reflects Jesus and the feeding of the 5,000 and the feeding of the 4,000. But he says, is this story not the true story of the spiritual life, that we trust our little lives? And some people may not appreciate that phrase, but there's just something that strikes me about that phrase, our little lives. Is there not? Let's see. We trust our little lives will multiply themselves. I don't know. I just like that phrase, our little lives, and he continues to use that over and over again. But do we trust that God, as we are given away, do we trust that our lives will be multiplied? Or is there something that we have to do in that? I mean,
But what could we do?
yeah.
What can we do?
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of envious that both of you have written a book. I mean, that's something that will go beyond your life. I mean, that's pretty cool, But it's
I think the only thing we can do is to be authentic, to be real to the people around us,
right.
And not get caught up in what our culture tells us is right and wrong. But that's very hard to do.
Yeah. So being authentic as we approach our own death. So again, to live in our giftedness, or to live out our giftedness, to again, to be, he talks a little bit about humility. I forget what he says exactly, but when he talks about our little life, that's really what he's pointing to, is a humility, that everything we are, everything that we have, every part of our being is a gift from God, the one who loves us, the one who has called us beloved. I mean, this is what he's pushing us back to, is that remembering that all of life is a gift from God. And so to be humble about that, and to say, God, even as I approach the grave, I may not have accomplished, this is what I've accomplished, but I may not have accomplished these things that I wanted to do, or I felt you wanted me to do. And yet I trust you to as my life is in your hands, I trust you to bless my departure, and to use my life to bless others. So let's talk a little bit about how we've been blessed by people. Could we talk about that a little bit? How have we been blessed by people who are no longer with us?
Oh, I have a story about when my mom was in the process of dying. Um, she was 52 when she died, and my dad was 50, and one of my sisters was 55. So I had always said, I probably won't be alive when I'm 60. And here I am. But when mom was in the hospital, she had had cancer of the thymus gland and had an extensive surgery, had chemotherapy, had radiation, and had suffered a great deal. And so when I went in to visit her, our oldest was only about 6 months old. And the pastor from the local church stopped in and wanted to give her communion. And mom, because of the radiation, she couldn't swallow anything anymore. And so he went to the nurse, and we were trying to figure out what to do, and soaked the wafer in the grape juice, and she got it down. But he said, Marilyn, is there anything else I can do for you? And she looked at him and just said, Jesus and I are walking down this road together. I'll be fine. And what a gift that has been with me. I mean, she's been gone 46 years now. It has developed, or it has impacted my faith walk as a young mother, as a 30, 40, 50, 60-year-old. It continues to bless me. And I just hope that something I've said to somebody will stick with them like that.
Right.
It was quite a gift she gave me.
I bet she blessed the pastor that day too. I bet he told that story more than once.
I've never thought of that. I bet so.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think of my mother so much. I was 79 when she died. She was 102. And I think the reason why I think about it so much is because of writing my book, writing my memoirs, because it makes you dig deep and think, why did we do this? Why did this happen? Why did she put up with this? Why did she? And so she's larger than life to me in a sense, because I think it was because of writing memoirs, digging up all that stuff and thinking deeply, trying to remember more and so on. And and I wasn't with her when she died. She was in a nursing home up in northern Minnesota, and I think more than once we were called up there because they thought it was the end. And then here she'd perk up again, and so she lived to be 2. And we had been there not too long before she died, but we weren't there when she died. But it's her life that impacts me, thinking about how she lived and how she managed all those years and on small amounts of money, and then secretly saved money to make a down payment on a house. And so
she was resourceful and
very resourceful. Yeah. I often think, what would my mother do, in a situation where something is broken or something? What would my mother do? I also think of what would Harvey do because he would know how to fix it. But both of them,
Well, Jenny tells the story. Jenny tells the story of her young mother who passed away, and Barb tells the story of her old mother. I have a story in between. My grandma was 77 years old, and she told me one day, her husband, my grandpa, died when he was 45. He was one of these people who died suddenly of a heart attack. My dad was 14, the oldest of 4 children. They were on the farm. So my grandmother, when she was 77 years old, we were having a conversation. It must have been around the time that he died, time of year that he died. And she said to me, when that happened, she said, I thought that death was the worst thing that could ever happen to anybody. She said, but since then, so it's been 35, 40 years, she said, but since then I've come to realize that there are worse things in life than death.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't 3 months later that she was killed in a car accident. She was going to see her brother on his birthday. He was in a nursing home. And she went across the bridge on an icy morning, and she was, fishtailed, went across the medium and into the other traffic, and was hit by a college student who was going home for Thanksgiving, I think. But just her words, just her words that I've come to realize there are worse things in life than death was really comforting to me. I mean, that was, it really, and it sticks with me, it's not something that just, there's something about those moments, she didn't even know she was teaching me anything, but what a life lesson to learn it. That was probably 20 years ago. So I was kind of just probably a young dad, and I could hardly even conceive of that idea. And here's my grandmother teaching me this, that there are worse things in life than death.
I think that what you just said, that, she didn't realize she was impacting you, but I think more often than not, we impact people when we don't realize it. Sure. Just living life. Mm-hmm. Sometimes when we try, we're trying too hard.
Right.
Yeah.
That's true. That is true.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
But anyway, a lot of people live on, their life speaks longer and more loudly than when they were alive, after death.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Famous people, yes, for sure. But even people like my mother, to me. Yeah.
Yeah, those people stick with us, don't we? Now, I guess one of the wonderings I had about this, is this easier for Catholic folks to believe? I mean, again, Henri was a Catholic priest. Is this easier? Because, they believe in, or they have a more active understanding of the saints, and this sort of thing. Is this a little bit foreign to Lutherans?
I think it is.
Yeah, I think it is too.
I think so.
Yeah,
it might be one of those things that we lost in the Reformation. Again, I've talked about that quite often, that we, well, if Catholics do this, we're gonna do it differently. And so I think,
sure.
I think that might be something that we lost in the Reformation, this idea that that we actually can live beyond, in a sense, live beyond the grave. And bless beyond the grave, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it surprised me to read it.
Yeah, it did me a little bit too.
Yeah.
I actually used one of the quotes in here at the funeral last week up in Buffalo Center with that family. This idea of multiplying our life and our love, multiplying after we leave the earth. And it seems to me, thinking about secular versus Christian or spiritual life, secular people often talk this way about their loved ones. Oh, dad's looking down on me, dad's with me, and I'm always a little uncomfortable with that.
Yeah.
Just because it's like, now it's almost like they're saying that person's taking what I see as the place of Jesus. Jenny, your mom said, Jesus is walking with me on this road. It's almost like they're saying, well, now dad is walking with me on the road. Well, no, that's really Jesus' role.
Right. I totally agree with you.
Yeah, but there is something to this idea that, and again, he's not saying what the secular world's saying. He's not saying that person is with you, that they're like this thing you can put in your pocket, to comfort you, but he's saying their spirit, their essence, the gifts that they had to share can continue to bless us along the way.
Mm-hmm. Doesn't hurt anything.
Yeah.
Well, except that, like you say, you don't want him to take the place of Jesus. But
I don't really argue. I don't argue. It's the wrong moment to argue about any of that stuff, or even to discuss it. So I don't. But I just am uncomfortable sometimes, because it seems like they're they're putting, you know, and Parker Palmer, he's a quite a spiritual writer himself. He said when he was writing about his own father's death, he said there was a time he couldn't see the forest through the trees, but when his dad died, it was then that he could see through the trees, and he realized that it wasn't his father's own strength or his father's own presence that brought him all these wonderful gifts in life, but it was the source of all that was God, was Jesus, and that source was still there. And it helped him, you know, through his father's death, that helped him connect even more deeply with Jesus. And I think, to me, that's what I want to have happen with a Christian death, is that we praise God for the way God gifted the person that we love and we miss, but we also recognize that same God is still with us, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I like the last paragraph on 123, where he talks about your love for the robin, your kindness to your friends, and your generosity to the poor are like little mustard seeds that will become strong trees in which many birds can build their nests.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine that in the center of your heart, you trust that your smiles and handshakes, your embraces and your kisses are only the early signs of a worldwide community of love and peace.
Yeah, keep
in the
going.
day and age we live in.
Mm-hmm.
Keep going.
That
I mean, he uses that word imagine quite a bit.
Imagine that you're trusting that every little movement of love you make will ripple out into ever new and wider circles, just as a little stone thrown into a still pond. Imagine.
Yeah.
Could you ever be depressed, angry, resentful, or vengeful? Could you ever hate, destroy, or kill? Could you ever despair of the meaning of your short earthly existence? You and I would dance for joy. You know, his use of the word joy, and I think I told you last week that joy was my theme while I was in the hospital. And so reading this brings me a lot of joy.
Yeah. When you read that, and when I read it earlier, it reminded me a little bit of the movie It's a Wonderful Life.
Oh yeah.
You know, how the character played by Jimmy Stewart, what's his name? He got the opportunity to see how the world would be if he had never been born.
Right.
So, but instead he pushes us to go the other way. Imagine if these little things that you do now, the gifts that you share now, are like that ripple in the pond. And it also makes me think of the Secular Song by the Beatles. There's actually a new documentary coming out about the Beatles, but their song, Imagine there's no heaven, imagine, you know, there's no, and they, you know, I think what they're working on is the war and the, you know, catastrophic failures of the church over the history of the church, you know, to dominate, to you know, actions that have hurt and destroyed lives. So that they're saying, imagine there's none of this kind of thing. But Henry is saying, just imagine if, you know, your little acts of love, you know, your those small ways that you've shared yourself, they're seeds that will continue to grow after we are gone.
Yeah.
That is powerful. It's really powerful. So I've planned my funeral. I don't know if I've given anybody access to it yet.
Will they find it?
Yeah, exactly.
Really?
I should probably give it to Jackie just in case it happens before I expect. But
How about
give
Renee?
it to her in a sealed envelope and tell her not to open it until you're gone.
Yeah, you know, I don't know about Renee. I mean, Renee, I think she recognizes that we will die, but she would be one, I think, who would want to deny that and not necessarily talk about it.
Oh.
Sure.
that's, and that's okay. That's where she's at. But I'm more comfortable talking about it. And I don't know why. I think over the years of ministry, I've thought about doing it quite a few times. And then I think one day I was maybe working on somebody else's actual funeral. And I just thought, it seemed like things just clicked. And I thought, I'm going to write this down. So I did.
But you know what? We all want Pastor Rod to preach our funeral sermons. Unfortunately, you can't do that.
I always kind of chuckle when I get some instructions from somebody who is deceased, and they've written it 15, 20 years ago, and the people that they wanted to do everything are long gone. Again, we just we just don't comprehend that the world's going to keep moving on.
Right.
Yeah. But anyway, I think it's so awesome to imagine.
Anyway, you're not even going to give those instructions to Renee.
I might. I mean, I should, or maybe I'll give them to one of my kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did that with our middle daughter would be the executive of our estate, and I've given her all those things for her to.
Yeah.
She's an in charge kind of person.
Yeah. It's important to think through all that stuff. Well, let's look at living the beloved, living as the beloved. So he says, the spiritual life, we are called to live a deep inner joy and peace, a life of the beloved lived in a world constantly saying, prove it, prove that you're worthy, that sort of thing. But then he says, what about the other side? So this is where he gets into the secular desires that we may have in terms of career and, a desire or hope for success and fame. Again, he says it's not necessarily a bad thing. And they're not even really opposed to each other. I think that's maybe the teaching there, is that these aren't really opposed to each other, but they can coexist, because the world, again, the world is only evil when you become its slave. So if we allow those things, our goals, our dreams, our striving for successes, if we allow them to remove us from this truth that we are the beloved, then that becomes problematic. And if we put all our hopes in that, and so if we don't meet a goal, or if we don't reach our potential, or what we think is our potential, that life becomes a failure, that's problematic. And so he says our challenge really is to claim our spiritual truth, which is that we are the beloved, and then live in the world as one who doesn't belong to it. So I think what he's really trying to do here is just to wrestle. Again, he's writing this to his secular friends, and I think he's trying to wed these two spheres, and to say that they're not separate, that it is all the life created by God, and they can coexist. But there is a bit of a balancing act here, in the sense of that we kind of walk a tightrope, that we hang on to the truth, that we're the beloved, all the while that we hold on to the truth that we are human beings with talents and potential and those sorts of things, as we try to live that out. So that's kind of the first part of it. Page 131, he talks about the truth that I am the beloved child of God, free to receive all things in gratitude, as a sign of my belovedness. So again, he gets back to he's saying we kind of end where we start, this truth that we're beloved, and that we can live this humble existence in gratitude, recognizing that all good things come from God. I do have a note that we could discuss, page 131 and 132, 131 at the bottom. As long as you live in the world, yielding to its enormous pressures to prove to yourself and to others that you are somebody, and knowing from the beginning that you will lose in the end, your life can be scarcely more than a long struggle to survive. If, however, you really want to live in the world, you cannot look to the world itself as the source of that life. I think that is just that, to me, that's profound. You cannot look to the world as a source, as the source of that life. And yet we do, right? I mean,
Yeah.
As young people, we look for others to validate, us in love. We look to validate ourselves through our education or our employment or our success on a team. And part of that's our human development. So it's not a criticism of that, but it's it's just a reminder that what we accomplish isn't the total sum of who we are. It's just not. That would be a lie.
Yeah.
So any thoughts from either of you on that?
Well, I think he's describing a healthy balance for a Christian, because, I mean, some sects want to withdraw from the world.
Yeah.
They want to be a part of it at all. And I think he's saying that isn't the answer either. We are living in the world. It's just that we have to know who we belong to and live accordingly.
Yeah. So he is validating, I think, the secular life in a sense.
Of course, he's talking to Fred. He's talking to Fred.
Yeah. Right.
But I think he's probably talking to all of us, that it's not a wicked way to live, because we are in the world.
It's the name you just said, he's talking to who?
Fred.
That's the guy started out with.
It's like Paul talking to somebody. This to me reads like a real day example of a Bible, of the stories and the examples, and that's kind of struck me at the end of this. And a lot of it, and you don't see, well, I guess I don't know how to judge that, but to be so at peace and to live in your own skin and not live in the world that surrounds us is, I wish I'd had this feeling when I was in my 20s.
Right.
But life is a journey. And
exactly.
I am where I am now. So
yeah.
So
one of the things I wrote down about this idea is that, this idea kind of back to the being given, at least at my stage of life, I often feel, okay, I'm okay with being given. There just isn't enough of me to go around.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that we all feel like that in the kind of the, when we're raising a family, or there just isn't enough of me to go around. But as I wrestle with that idea, this is what he continually points me back to, is this idea that I need to live out of my giftedness, not of my accomplishment. I'm always gonna fall short just because of the demands on my life. So how do I live out of the giftedness rather than out of that place of taking care of everybody else's needs?
Right.
On
I would
130,
imagine as a pastor that that's something that comes up frequently.
yeah,
I mean, you're involved in so many people's lives,
yeah.
from birth through death.
One of my friends, a retired pastor, said to me once that he retired because his should list was getting way too long. You know, I should do this, I should do that.
Right.
You know, and
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
but
I had
that's not unique to pastors. You know, we all have a should list, right?
Yeah. I had a friend when we lived in Waterloo who said to me once upon a time, Jenny, you need to quit shoulding on yourself.
Yeah. Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That was
So
a
kind of
gem she
back,
left me with.
yeah, back to this page 133. I kind of wrote the word
Yeah.
key at the top, 3 lines down. The change of which I speak is the change from living as living life as a painful test to prove that you deserve to be loved, to living it as an unceasing yes to the truth of that belovedness. Put simply, life is a God-given opportunity to become who we are, to affirm our own true spiritual nature, claim our truth, appropriate and integrate the reality of our being, but most of all, to say yes to the one who calls us beloved. What I like about that is confirmation. That's kind of how we talk about confirmation is, you know, this is a process of responding to God's yes to us by us saying yes to God. And we kind of use that language in the Lutheran church. So I really like that. But God's yes to us, to call the one who calls us beloved. It's
good. It's very good, isn't it?
It is. Yeah.
And maybe that's the way we need to start each day, is just to remind ourselves, you know, or to listen for that yes from God.
Mm-hmm.
I've been trying to be purposeful in some of the things I've been doing, you know, while I was in the hospital for those 7 months, and hoping. Well, one thing I did was I committed myself. I didn't tell anybody, but I wrote a letter to each of my 12 nieces and nephews and just talked about what I remember from when they were born and things while they were growing up. And, you know, they're all 30 and above now. Just how proud I am of them. And I didn't expect to hear back from them. I didn't need to hear back from them. But they were really touched, and a lot of them either emailed me or called me, which just filled me with joy. And it was that connection, that relational part. And then as an outcome of that, they organized a cousin's Zoom, and every single one of my nieces and nephews got on that call, on that Zoom call. And it was probably one of the highlights of my life.
Yeah.
Because they sat there and they affirmed me and they said, Aunt Jen, we love you. And it was nothing I would have, if I'd tried to plan something like that, it never would have happened. But it was just so genuine and they were so open.
Yeah.
And I felt really blessed.
That is neat.
In a sense, you were saying yes to them, and they responded back with a yes to you. I mean, in the language we just used.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. What a gift. Again, a gift. Yeah.
It was a gift. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
On page 135, Henry says, very bottom, last paragraph, what I most want to say is that when the totality of our daily lives is lived from above, that is, as the beloved sent into the world, then everyone we meet and everything that happens to us becomes a unique opportunity to choose for the life that cannot be conquered by death. And I just wrote amen,
Yeah.
the opportunity to choose for the life that cannot be conquered by death.
Mhm.
So we're close to the end here. 137. Eternal life is not some great surprise that comes unannounced at the end of our existence. In time, it is rather the full revelation of what we have been and have lived all along. Again, just amen. So as we think about this book, I really have struggled within myself in terms of the goal. And Henry was trying to speak to secular people, and in the end he was criticized. I mean, he just not really criticized, but the critique was that it had fallen short.
Yeah.
He didn't realize how secular they really are. And they said, I guess Fred said, you need to tell us, you need to start with the questions, who is God, and where is God? And those are questions out of the epilogue. And I thought, really, Henry ended up writing, he really ended up writing to believers.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's still worth, because we all know people who are secular, who are non-practicing, non-believing. So I think it's still worth thinking about what we might say to a secular world, or how much we might respond to a secular world. And I honestly don't know the answer to that.
I was hoping you'd give us the answer.
Yeah, I bet you were. Well, again, I think where Henry starts in the right place is that he has a relationship with Fred, right? So,
Right.
so they can talk about these things, and that's for us too. It's going to be the starting place is to have the relationship. Where he doesn't start in the right place is to start talking about, you are the beloved, because Fred says we're not there yet. We just, that's, what do you call that? A dream world. He said that's, if you don't answer these other questions first, that's just like a dream world. We can't get there.
Well, there's someplace in scripture that says that, I don't know where it is, that if you are not born from above or whatever, you cannot understand these things. I mean, it's the Spirit, the Spirit that teaches us.
Yeah.
And so, but the question almost has to come from Fred. Like he would say, how do I get there?
Right.
How do I get there? Because until you're ready to ask that question, you might not be ready to receive the answer either. It would be to receive Christ, or to believe how Christ died for us sins.
Yeah.
I mean, that's basic before you have the sanctification process that he's talking about,
I think that's Nicodemus. Isn't that Jesus' conversation with Nicodemus in chapter 3 of John's Gospel? Unless you're born from above, you cannot.
Yeah, there you go. That's the basic
If I tell you about earthly things and you do not believe, how will you believe if I tell you about heavenly things?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And really what Henry is teaching is heavenly things. These are heavenly.
It is really,
Yeah.
It's more advanced thinking. In fact, some of the things here, I mean, we've been educated in the gospel for years, and some of these ideas are a little bit fresh to me,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think you're right that it's more for a Christian.
I think what I like about the writing is the fact that he's really non-judgmental.
Yes.
He's really inclusive, saying to the world, you are part of God's beloved creation, that you are loved, you are valued, you're treasured. And that, to me, that does open a door, at least for a conversation. And so
And so I understand
oh.
that he has trouble accepting the things he teaches himself. I mean, living it,
Right.
he's constantly being plagued by doubts,
Sure.
constantly having doubts himself or, yeah. So,
And I think that's part of why I enjoyed reading this so much, because he was real in his
Yeah.
writings.
Yes.
He didn't put on any airs or
mhm.
he was truthful.
Yeah.
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 Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he allows himself to be very vulnerable in his writing, and I think that's
Yep.
again, I just want to, I mean, I would love to thank him for it, because I mean, what a risk. He took a risk. He took the risk of rejection
Yeah.
to do this project, and in the end it was rejected at some level. It was appreciated, I think, but it was rejected. So I mean, just the courage it took to publish this book, I think,
Yeah.
is pretty amazing. And
What year was this published?
wow.
It's gonna look.
Turn the page and see. 1992.
92. Okay.
Well, that was the first
Wow.
edition. Yeah, copyright.
Mhm.
So how long ago was that? 92.
Almost 20 years. Oh, 30.
More,
Yeah.
almost.
Yeah, he's been gone 25 years already. This is the 25th year of his death
Okay.
anniversary. So yeah,
Is it
2000.
okay?
Well, he's a prolific writer.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in 20 next year it'll be 30 years. This book will be 30 years old. So.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
Wow.
So I don't really have any terrific way to end the discussion tonight, but there is a question 146, it looks like, or yeah, so the question on 146, do I really need God to live, to be happy, to enjoy life, to fulfill my deepest desires? Do I need faith to live a decent and creative life? I think, again, these are questions that secular people ask. Even Christians ask those. Do I really need God to live? And I would say, I think I probably said this already, but coming out of COVID, I realized that we can live without God and the church in our life. But I've also realized that life is better when we have God and the church in it. I mean, not only because we have the promise of eternal life, but also because we hear this truth from the church. We hear, and I'm saying the church, not just as me as pastor and those gathered on Sunday morning. I'm talking about, believers in their daily lives, reminding each other that you are the beloved, that your life is valuable, that God is for you and not against you, that God is that love is always stronger than hate, and that life is always stronger than death. These are things, these are messages that we as the church proclaim to each other. So can we live without God and the church, and even without faith? Absolutely. But I believe life is better when we live it connected with the church and with, in faith.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the pandemic, I hadn't been able to come to church for 4 or 5 years. And the first year or two, I so missed it, because the church had been part of my life my entire life. But with the pandemic and the advancement of technology and being able to not just listen to the church service, but to see it, I realized all of a sudden that I missed that community that came from going to church. And I get a sense of that when I watch it now on YouTube. So I'm so thankful for that.
You get a sense of that community?
I do.
That's great. I mean,
Yeah.
we're working on how to, striving to build community online, because we know that it can be done.
Yeah.
And so that's encouraging that you get a sense of that. And my hope is that it doesn't stop there, but it encourages people to reach out to each other throughout the week and make those connections, and maybe even talk about something that happened in worship.
Well, I think it's through worship, and then, I download the bulletin and then the announcements. So I continue to see what's happening, what's going on. And I was going to say something else, but I can't remember now.
Well, you are the beloved. You are the beloved of God.
And so are you, Pastor Rod.
Thank you.
So are you.
I appreciate being reminded of that once in a while too.
There you are,
Uh,
Well, thank you for joining. We will in January, it sounds like, which is good for me. Kathy McAnally will lead the next book, The Return of the Prodigal Son, and we'll look at that in January. So
in January, okay.
yeah,
January, okay.
we kind of scheduled 2 months for each book. So just with Christmas, the Advent and Christmas, she thought it'd be best to do it in January. So that, like I said, that's good for me too. So keep an eye open for those for announcements about that, and tell your friends what a blessing Henri Nouwen's writings are. And
Okay.
Yep. God's blessings to both of you. Thanks for joining me tonight.
Thank you. Good night.
And to you. Thank you very much.
Jenny, blessings to you in Rochester.
Thank you. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.